Okay, so Carol Gallagher, welcome to New Ireland TV.
Thank you very much. Thanks, James. Nice to be here. Nice to see you.
Fantastic, and you're running as a candidate in the West Tyrone constituency for the Assembly elections. Would you like to just explain a basic overview of what your candidacy is going to be about?
The candidacy is about providing a real, authentic and genuine alternative to voters in West Tyrone. For too long they have been trapped in a cycle of voting for sectarian tribal politics along green and orange lines, and People Before Profit offers a radical alternative to that. It's an opportunity for me as a PBP member to bring my experience, my lived experience as a working class single parent of two school-aged children to bear on politics and on the vote public. What we want to see in West Tyrone and right across Northern Ireland is a radical alternative to the current system, which is really on its head. It's upside down in terms of benefits to working class people on the ground. Most of the wealth in our society is concentrated in the hands of a few privileged elite groups in massive corporations and big pharma companies, in extractive mining companies and so on, and very little trickles down to the grassroots level into the hands and into the pockets of people who need it most. Working class families, those who depend on benefits, those who depend on a crumbling healthcare system and social health and social care system. So we want to see all of that turned on its head and put priorities given to people above profit, as it says in the name of the party. So that's what we're about, and we're about providing real change and something really different.
Fantastic. Yeah. You mentioned the extractive mines and such. Dalradian Gold, which is going to be in the constituency, has trumpeted quite loudly their opportunities for employment. How do you balance that with the effects on the environment that they will be having?
Well, that's a very good question, and I don't think we can. I don't think that the benefits that they propose and suggest that will come to the local communities in any way can ever outweigh the destruction that causes, the toxic mining causes to our local areas and to our local communities. It's very hard to see any evidence, even to date, in terms of the work that's been ongoing by Dalradian and other companies. It's very difficult to see the outworking of that in terms of real jobs for local people. There haven't been very many of them. They tend to use their own crews that they bring along with them to do the work and do the jobs. So it really hasn't rolled out, it really hasn't been borne out in practice that there's been any advantage or too much of an advantage that way to local people. In terms of the environmental damage, it cannot be offset by what they suggest that they're bringing in terms of opportunities for the local environment, the local people. What they are bringing to the local environment is poison, cyanide, absolute mess and muck. They're completely eroding beautiful countrysides and landscapes. The beautiful green hills and the sperrins are being completely depleted. It's full of muck and dust and puddles. The air that we breathe must be clean, the water we drink must be clean, and the soil must be free of all of these poisons that are being pumped in by these toxic mining companies, so that we have safe eating, breathing and living environments, not just for now but for future generations as well.
So what do you find is the major blockades to progressing legislation like this?
It can be any number of things depending on who you listen to and who you believe. What I find, as with so many issues that need to be addressed by Stormont, many of the establishment parties, or all of the establishment parties, sit around and point the fingers of blame at each other and don't take on resolving these issues and addressing these issues for people in a serious way. So there's a lot of finger pointing, there's a lot of blame put on things like COVID pandemic and so forth, and of course these massive inequalities in our society were in place and have been in place long before any COVID pandemic struck. The fact that the DUP have thrown the toys out of the pram and walked off as well mean that the rest of the parties who remain in Stormont cannot take all of the action that they maybe would now like to take before the close of the session now coming into the election. So what we see is parties arguing, fighting in front of the microphone, in front of the camera, but behind backs they are patting each other in their back. They're not collaborating for the benefits of people on the ground. They're collaborating to maintain their own selfish interests, and anything that stands in the way of progress for people and benefits for people is not a positive thing. It's not a good thing, and that's why people before profit and candidates like myself want to see a change. We want to get in there. We want to have more voices in there to shout louder and kick the door from the inside, as it were, to basically get the change made and say, look, we don't want this kind of procrastination, this kind of intransigence anymore. We've suffered too long. People are really in times of hardship now, and the buck cannot be passed. No more excuses can be made. The money is there. There are plenty of money trees around. If it is to support war efforts, if it is to fund private companies for this, that and the other. And what we must remember is that the establishment parties were very well able to come together and collectively campaign for cuts to massive corporation, the taxes on massive corporations quite a few years back, and they all banded together to support that, to alleviate the tax burden on massive and wealthy companies. What they haven't shown is that same collectivity and passion for supporting ordinary working class people now in their times of hardship and need in exactly the same way, and that is just not right. We don't see any benefit, and in fact it's continuing to be very divisive, that any parties and any representatives going into Stormont have to immediately identify as green or orange. All that does is maintain the tribal divisions, the sectarian divides along green and orange sectarian lines that serve no purpose other than to keep all workers down, whatever their background, whatever communities they identify with, and so on. When people come together and see that there is something different, a party that's different and offers support and solidarity amongst all communities, green, orange, red, any other colour, and from whatever cultural background and so forth. That's what they want to see, and that's the difference that they want to see. And I don't think that anyone many people aren't even aware that the mandatory power sharing even exists and that it's written into law. And when I have explained it to people, they have been astounded that it is still that way, that it's still set out along green and orange lines. And what they say is that they welcome any opportunity to break away from that division and that sectarian way of working. It's something that has kept us down, has kept people divided, and it really needs to change.
But you're involved in the organisation of Omagh Pride, which was featured on the Ireland TV. So just in general with issues that Omagh Pride or the Pride movement and such would cover, are you in support of those, or are you, how would you describe the need for those going forward?
Well, I think that Omagh Pride, the very first Omagh Pride, was a wonderful example of how the community there in that part of Tyrone and Omagh came together to support the LGBT community last September. The organising committee really started from grassroots, welcomed everyone in to participate. It was an open house, an open door, and everyone brought what they could, including allies and members of the LGBT community themselves, all coming together. And all they wanted to create was, yes, a protest event, yes, they wanted to acknowledge how far the LGBT community have come, but how much further they still have to go on their journey for full equality and full equity and full respect across the community. But they wanted to create a carnival atmosphere for children and families on the day. Bright colours, sunshine, smiling faces, and the flags, the banners and so on were absolutely amazing. It was very important for the committee that it was a politically neutral event, that the people who spoke from the platform were very much from the LGBT community themselves, spoke about their own experiences of discrimination and of hardship and of feeling marginalised and oppressed. Also very much an important event for showcasing the barriers that still exist, particularly to transgender people, around sexual health care and support services. Mental health support services as well, very, very key to people in the LGBTQ community, and support for addiction services. So all of those issues were teased out, were discussed, were brought to the fore in the speeches, but the process of being engaged with the LGBT community and being welcomed in as an ally to that was hugely empowering, and the event on the day was a massive success. We've met just during the week to plan number 2, event, parade number 2, and we're looking forward to it being exactly as vibrant, exactly as inspirational, only maybe just a bit even brighter and bigger the next time around. A real carnival atmosphere we're planning.
During a recent Belfast City Council meeting, a lot of the other establishment parties started rounding on the people before profit representatives.
People before profit, since they came on this council, they've been interested in playing politics so they can go out and tell their electorate, oh, we propose a much lesser increase in rates. And I would remind members that only a few years ago we got a very strong letter from the Audit Office.
Said, I understand the temptation here to call people before profit's bluff on this. We all know what people before profit do on this council. They routinely allow a situation where they can vote against something that everyone else is voting for, or for something everyone else is voting against, so that they can go out on their social media feeds and into their communities to tell people that they took a stand, even whenever that was completely irresponsible.
But I think it's actually more than calling people before profit's bluff. I think it's about making them realise that they can actually enter Belfast City Council as elected representatives who are here to do a job more than protest.
Do you think that's a fair representation of the work that PPT is doing, or is that something that needs to be addressed?
No, I don't see it as a fair representation at all. I see it very much as a cop-out, and I see it very much as an indication of the lack of answers that they have to these questions themselves. Our answer to budgeting for the kinds of changes that we want to see focus very much on taxing the wealthy. And I mean taxing the uber wealthy, those millionaires and billionaires who are part of the capitalist exploitative class, who get away tax-free, small tax, low tax. They're handed government grants in one shape or another to offset charges that they do make and they do pay. And the people on the ground, the grassroots voters on the ground, see nothing of that. They see nothing in terms of support. So as I say, the entire system is completely on its head, and we need to reverse that and put people at the top as well. As I say, the way to do that is primarily through a tax on the wealthy, and that will provide and grow a huge money tree. I think what's interesting to note is that there is such a lot of focus on people before profit at the minute, and in some ways it's encouraging because it means that they are listening to the politics that are coming out of the branches across our communities, and it means that they are taking note of what we're saying and perhaps feeling not a little bit threatened that perhaps people now are having their eyes opened, that they realise that they are being sold down the Swanee basically because the money is resting in the bank accounts of the elite, and they're fighting for their own self-interests, and the people on the ground don't matter. And when you have people coming along like myself, who have no vested interests in career politics, they have no vested interest in massive salaries, in subsidised or massive expenses. If I'm elected, I will take an industrial wage, because I find it very hard to understand how people as landlords, as massive business owners and so on, and the wealthy elite that are at Stormont, I find it very hard to understand how they understand the needs of ordinary people, and if they feel threatened in that way, to me that's a good thing, because we're shaking up the system, and that's what the system needs.
I was just looking through the candidates in West Tyrone, and there's at least 3 socialist candidates, including yourself, but if you include the establishment parties, that increases even more. Is that a desirable thing for the electorate to face, or would you prefer if there was a more unified voice from the left?
Well, I suppose we have no control, nor should we have any control over any party or any individual's choice to stand. That is part of the democratic process, and that's to be welcomed. The fact that so many people or individuals want to engage in the political process, and it gives people choices, and it allows democracy to run its course. Absolutely, it's an important part of that. What I would say is that people before profit, I can't speak for the other parties or other individuals, of course, in terms of what they claim to offer or why people would vote for them. What People Before Profit brings is a 32-county eco-socialist party that already has representation in the Dáil. We have 4 elected TDs there. We have 6 councillors in the Republic of Ireland. We have 4 councillors here in the north, and we have our elected MLA at Stormont, Jerry Carroll. And what we want to do is build upon that, and when we can see real opportunities for People Before Profit to grow and build in a way that only we see ourselves doing at the moment. As I say, I can only speak for People Before Profit, but I think that what we offer is very distinct in terms of the growing numbers within our party and the growing interest in the membership of our party, particularly here in West Tyrone as well. As I can say that very much so. So that's what we offer as People Before Profit, and I think that we're the ones to vote for on the 5th of May.
The bar we're actually sitting in, where you had your lunch, is actually directly on the side of the A5 road. The A5 road saga goes right back to the trains going down. Obviously as part of your candidacy is to improve this road, but what do you anticipate to be able to do as an MLA in order to sort of accelerate that process?
Okay, so we need to keep voicing the concerns of local people about the state of the road and the state of the infrastructure here, and keep saying it and keep petitioning for it, rallying for it and so on, and keep supporting the residents and the residents' campaigns along the length of the road. We have been campaigning for this. It's been ongoing for far too long, and too many lives have been lost. I think it is something that is way past its time to be updated and upgraded to secure a good infrastructure for the people of West Tyrone. What's very important though to run alongside that ought to be a free green transport system along the railway lines. If we can build a railway line alongside every inch of road that we have, it will take cars off the road. It will improve access for rural communities in County Tyrone as well. So I think the two of them must go hand in hand. Yes, the upgrade and the advancement of the A5 project, long overdue, but it has to run alongside free green transport, alongside that particular route, but across the northwest and indeed across all Ireland, an all-Ireland rail network to provide clean, green, affordable transport is essential. Hello everyone, and thank you all very much for coming out tonight. It's great to see you all, and it is very much appreciated. A few friends have asked me why I'm standing for election here in West Tyrone. At the age of 50, why am I even bothering? Why am I taking it on? And I'll be honest, my answer to people who've asked me has gone along the lines of we need change, we need real change, and probably comes across as a bit of a cliche. But it makes me mindful of what we, People Before Profit, really mean as we offer the constituents of West Tyrone a real alternative in May. Of course, over the next 5 or 6 weeks, we're going to hear a lot of talk about change from the establishment parties at Stormont. They'll roll out the same empty electioneering promises about change and moving forward, and will insist on telling us all about their so-called record of delivery. So let's have a quick look at what they have changed or delivered since the last election in 2017, and even since Stormont came into being over 20 years ago. Well, for the first 3 years of the current Stormont government, they didn't even take their seats. However, for most of that time, they collected full-time wages, whilst our key services were put under immense pressure and stripped bare. It was only when NHS workers took strike action just before the pandemic struck that they actually took their seats. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, it was not the Stormont executive that delivered. It was ordinary frontline workers in the NHS, transport, retail, supermarket workers, teachers, civil servants, and many more who stepped up. Essential workers. And now what's the reward? Nothing. Derisory, insulting pay offers that lag way behind the rising inflation, at a 30-year high now at almost just over 6%, and set to rise to 8% or even more in the next few weeks. And not forgetting the national insurance hike that's going to bring yet more financial pressures. The parties that once stood on doorsteps applauding are now abandoning essential workers. And these workers are asking merely for moderate pay rises in line with inflation and improved terms and conditions. We're seeing UCU staff, NIPSA's EWOs, and Unite Council workers all out on the pickets this week and in recent weeks and months. Others, including teachers and TransLink workers, are also balloting for industrial action at the moment as well. And just last week, we witnessed the disgusting treatment of the P&O workers ruthlessly sacked by a company that makes billions of pounds. In conversations that I've had with workers across the picket lines, shared issues that come up over and over again are that workers feel undervalued, that employers are way out of touch, and that workers just cannot cope with the spiralling costs of living. Is this the best that workers deserve? Is this the best that they can expect? Is this delivery for our community? Of course, none of this affects the MLAs of the Stormont Executive Parties themselves, who have just awarded themselves a £500 pay rise. Just like that. And let's not forget that they also gave themselves a £1,000 pay rise after their 3-year hiatus. But let's look at what they've actually collectively delivered, what they have delivered. Well, that would be the worst cost of living crisis in living memory. We know that increases in the cost of living are not anything new. The unemployed and the ordinary working people were already experiencing rapidly rising costs, welfare cuts, stagnating wages, long before the pandemic broke or any wars began. I don't need to remind the people sitting here of the high levels of unemployment and social deprivation that have plagued and devastated West Tyrone for generations. What we have now is a crisis that has recently reached its own pandemic levels. Utility and food bills are soaring, national insurance, like I said, will rise next month, and fuel costs are increasing almost daily. And despite an initial outcry and the usual political showboating and empty promises, there have been no concrete measures to alleviate the hardships on the ground. In rural areas such as West Tyrone, fuel costs are in effect another additional tax, because here we're forced to rely on private transport, because local rural schools have closed, because local rural shops have shut as they can't compete with multinationals. Pregnant people are forced to travel to Derry or Enniskillen for maternity services, often a journey of an hour, even more. And we generally must travel further to our places of work, and then we have the luxury of paying for parking. Rural areas will see no benefit from short-term opportunistic electoral promises such as a meagre freeze on public transport prices that are already too high anyway, and along infrequent and inadequate routes. Unless we start to properly address the issues facing the rural communities, then we only continue to see their continued decline and increased isolation among rural residents, and we can expect that that will have only a negative impact on their mental and emotional health and well-being. But we can and we must make a start on this through a free, green and extensive public transport system that includes a long overdue upgrade of the A5. So those are some of the aspects of the establishment party's record of delivery, and it really doesn't amount to much, does it?
In fact, it falls far short of the prodigious yet empty promises of peace and prosperity that as an optimistic 20-something I recall being made by the establishment parties over 20 years ago, and that have been made repeatedly and failed ever since. And that is why I'm standing.
Woo!
I'm standing because real systemic change is needed across the board on all the issues that affect the constituents here in West Tyrone. I'm not just talking about the changing of faces on election posters and the names on ballot papers promising and re-promising new visions or new futures, a change of this and a change of that, election after election for decades. And yet, over 20 years on, the old guard and the status quo, the tribal politics remain the same and fail to deliver for ordinary people. We can see through this, and people here deserve something completely different. I'm standing to show that there is an alternative way of living that benefits everyone, not just the privileged few. Elected representatives must remember that they are on post to serve the interests of ordinary people, not their own interests or those who sit across the floor from them in the Assembly. Instead of handing millions of public monies to large, already wealthy private companies who provide merely low-paid, zero-hour contract jobs in return, we must start looking after ordinary workers and ordinary people. I and every one of my party members will always put people before profit, because that is the role of any decent elected representative, and that is how it should be.
Woo!
We need an alternative society not organised around the interests of big business and the privileged few, but around the needs of everyone, including the most vulnerable and marginalised. We must protect our education system. No parent should have to worry about the cost of a school uniform. No teacher should have to buy school supplies or toilet paper. Every child should get a free hot school meal. And every child should receive every ounce of support that they need to overcome any and all barriers to education that they may ever face. We must remove barriers to higher education too, and no one should be saddled with a mountain of debt from student loans and fees. The availability and delivery of a wide range of courses must be maintained, preparing and enabling students to be contributors to a well-rounded society, and should never be about just providing courses that offer value for money. We must acknowledge the measure of value-added benefits from our higher education system to our society, which go way beyond the financial returns. We must protect our precious free NHS healthcare system. No one should have to face long waiting lists for medical treatment. No one should be exposed to the profit-driven practices of private ancillary social and domestic care services. Public monies must not go to the likes of Capita, but should instead be used to support those experiencing health barriers to unemployment. People before profit reject any moves towards NHS privatisation and the creation of a two-tier health system. We demand a full, universal health and social care system that is free at the point of access and looks after everyone from every background, from cradle to grave, as it was set up to be.
Woo!
We must protect workers and jobs. There is plenty of work to do. It's simply that there are few, no, or poorly paid jobs because the money is hoarded by the wealthy elite. We need more nurses, more doctors, teachers, transport workers. We need more investments in jobs that provide alternative energy sources. More houses need built and existing ones retrofitted to address housing and environmental issues. Remember that every single right that workers do have today has had to be fought for, has had to be won. They've never, ever been simply handed to us. And make no mistake, the wealthy elite are now trying to roll back any of these gains and rights to recoup their so-called lost profits at every opportunity. So, we must support all workers taking industrial action or campaigning for better terms and conditions, not just with empty words up at Stormont, but by real actions. With feet on the ground, flags in the air, chants, pickets, and real solidarity. Trade Union Freedom Bill was first introduced in Stormont in 2016 by Eamon McCann and brought back for consideration just 3 weeks ago by our West Belfast MLA Jerry Carroll. And this bill would have repealed many of Margaret Thatcher's anti-trade union laws from way back in the 1980s. It was voted down in Stormont by DUP, UUP and the Alliance. We must ask these parties why that was done. And we must ask all other parties why it took over 20 years for the legislation to be proposed, despite it being a devolved issue for many, many years. Because workers' rights are not electoral soundbites. They are real actions and must be continually and consciously protected and enhanced to safeguard ordinary working people and their families 365 days of the year, every single year. We must also protect and support families and tenants in private rentals. And again, just last week, Jerry Carroll succeeded in having an amendment to the Private Tenancies Bill passed at Stormont that would have seen a 10% reduction in private rents for everyone. Savings of between £400 and £1,000 per year, which may actually have cushioned many a little from the increased renting costs of the last few years, as well as from the ongoing cost of living crisis. Unbelievably, Stormont then voted to reverse Jerry's amendment after they realised that they had voted by mistake. It gets better. They've gone on to insist that the mistake was nothing to do with the fact that many MLAs have private rental interests themselves. No, it was because, in their own words, they didn't have the competency to carry it out. That's right. They did not have the competency. Says it all, really. So we must protect and defend people above all else. And that is what I pledge to do as a People Before Profit candidate for West Tyrone. But as a committed and authentic eco-socialist party, we cannot and must not forget that the biggest threat we're all facing around the world currently is the very real threat of climate change. We are experiencing a climate emergency. For example, today in Antarctica, the temperature is almost 40 degrees above normal for this time of year, and extreme weather patterns are devastating many areas across the globe. That might seem a million miles away. But on our own doorsteps, we see flash flooding in local areas like Ballycoman and Strabane all the time, and issues still remain unfixed, such as those since we experienced the massive floods in 1987. And again, we have nothing but sound bites and greenwashing from the establishment parties. Again, not so far from here, several gold mining companies have earmarked large rural areas to be exploited for profit at the expense of our health and our environment. All over the world, these companies have caused nothing but damage to natural ecosystems and have divided local communities with their toxic activities. People Before Profit have long stood with brave and determined local activists in their campaigns opposing this extractive capitalist exploitation. And we'll continue to call on the Stormont Executive to fully protect our rural areas and natural habitats ongoing. We need radical actions to address climate change, and we need those taken immediately. Time is not on our side. We need an alternative system in society and a just transition that improves rural areas and also protects those who are reliant on agriculture for their income. As a representative of People Before Profit, I will continue, regardless, to fight for social justice and to stand with all of those fighting and facing discrimination. With refugees, with the Black Lives Matter movement, the traveller community, the LGBT plus community, and with those fighting for disability rights, for women's rights and equality, and for free, safe and local access to full reproductive health services. Woo! We will continue to provide an honest, decent and resolute alternative to the old divisive green and orange sectarian politics that have held us back for far too long. So, on the 5th of May, I am asking the people of West Tyrone to vote for me to deliver a real alternative society and for genuine grassroots representation for all ordinary working people. Thank you very much.